was in Graceland in the foyer on July the 5th.
For 16 years, Sonny West was closer to Elvis Presley than almost anyone alive. He saw the generosity, the temper, the exhaustion, and the spiral that no one could stop. Now, his own words reveal the truth about life inside the Memphis Mafia and the final days that still haunt him. Stay tuned for the revelation of Elvis Presley. Who is Sonny West? Sonny West was connected to Elvis through family ties. His cousin, Red West, had been one of Elvis's earliest friends. When an opening came up in Elvis's security team, Sonny stepped into a world few ever entered. He wasn't just a bodyguard. In the Memphis Mafia, the close-knit entourage that surrounded Elvis, Sonny played the role of protector, companion, and sometimes fixer. His job was to ensure that Elvis could live his life with as much freedom as possible, even in the glare of constant fame. Sonny recalled in interviews about how they traveled the world with him. It was a brotherhood, as they were there for him 24/7. In the early years, the work felt like a dream. Tours were sold out, movie sets buzzed with energy, and Elvis remained approachable and playful. Sonny often spoke about Elvis's habit of surprising people with gifts, cars, jewelry, even houses, if he felt they needed them. That was Elvis, Sonny said. If you were down, he'd find a way to lift you up. But it wasn't all laughter and late-night parties. The Memphis Mafia was there to shield Elvis from unwanted attention, to deal with overly aggressive fans, and to keep him safe during public appearances. That could mean physically stepping in when someone got too close or quietly handling situations before they turned into headlines. Sonny thrived in that role, the adrenaline, the loyalty, the shared sense of purpose. Still, even in the glory years, Sonny noticed moments when the weight of Elvis's fame seemed to press down harder. There were nights when Elvis would withdraw from the group, choosing solitude over company. Sonny didn't think much of it at first. After all, everyone needs quiet now and then. But looking back, he'd come to see those moments as early signs of the changes that were yet to come. Life inside Memphis Mafia. For Sonny West, life inside the Memphis Mafia was unlike any other job. It wasn't a 9-to-5 with a clock in and clock out. It was an all-consuming commitment. He and the others traveled wherever Elvis went, living out of suitcases and hotel rooms, moving between concert arenas, movie sets, and Graceland. It was 24/7, Sonny once said. You didn't take a day off from being Elvis's friend or his protector. Their duties ranged from the obvious, security at concerts, managing crowd control, and keeping intrusive reporters at bay, to the unusual. Some days Sonny was a driver, other days a personal shopper, and occasionally he was simply someone Elvis could confide in during the quiet hours after a show. The boundaries between work and friendship blurred. Sonny often said that they were just employees to Elvis. They were family. That sense of family came with privileges most could only dream of. There were lavish parties, spur-of-the-moment trips, and expensive gifts. Sonny often talked about Elvis's generosity. If he found out you needed something, he'd get it for you, whether it was a Cadillac or just a kind word. It wasn't rare for Elvis to hand over keys to a brand new car or surprise someone with jewelry just to see them smile. But life in the inner circle wasn't only glamour. The Memphis Mafia had an unspoken code. What happened inside the group stayed there. Discretion was as important as protection. Sonny referred to the Memphis Mafia as the wall between Elvis and the outside world. That meant handling personal matters discreetly, covering for him when necessary, and making sure the public saw the version of Elvis that he wanted them to see. Still, there was a cost to living in such a tight bubble. Long stretches on the road meant little time for family back home. The pressure to be constantly available left little room for personal freedom. And as much as they laughed, there was an undercurrent of tension, a shared understanding that fame was both a blessing and a burden. Sonny, more than most, could sense when the balance between the two began to shift. Those shifts became harder to ignore as the years went on. Behind the curtain, the job of being Elvis's protector was slowly becoming something different, no longer just about shielding him from fans or the press, but from problems much closer to home. Early trouble in Memphis. By the mid-1970s, Sonny West had been by Elvis Presley's side for more than 15 years. He had seen the king at the height of his powers, commanding arenas with charisma that seemed unshakable, making audiences scream with the lift of an eyebrow. But those who were close to him knew that the Elvis on stage was not always the Elvis behind closed doors. For Sonny, the changes began subtly, almost imperceptibly, until they could no longer be ignored. On tour, Sonny noticed moments that didn't fit the man he had come to know. When he appeared in concert, he seemed disoriented and didn't know what city he was in. At first, Sonny chalked it up to the relentless schedule due to months on the road. City after city, late-night performances, and constant travel could make anyone lose track. But soon, the lapses felt different. Elvis would forget the set list or confuse details about recent events, and there was a heaviness to his demeanor that Sonny couldn't shake. The Memphis Mafia's work began to shift in ways that troubled him. Security was still part of the job, keeping fans at bay, ensuring safe arrivals and departures, but increasingly, Sonny found himself managing situations within the inner circle. Late-night gatherings went on until dawn, leaving Elvis exhausted for daytime commitments. There were rehearsals skipped, meetings ignored, and moments where Elvis seemed to retreat entirely from people who cared about him. Sonny wasn't alone in his concern. Among the bodyguards, many of them childhood friends or family, whispered conversations began to surface. In later interviews, Sonny said that they were only trying to stop Elvis because they knew he was himself. But Elvis had a way of brushing those concerns aside with a joke, a smile, or a change of subject. Sonny explained that he was in denial about everything. You can't get help until you admit you need it. The unspoken code within the Memphis Mafia made things more complicated. Loyalty to Elvis was not just about physical protection. It meant guarding his image, preserving the version of him the public adored. Questioning him, especially in front of others, was almost unthinkable. But Sonny knew the quiet, private interventions weren't working. He would sometimes wait until they were alone, speaking in a tone that mixed concern with caution. Elvis would listen politely, then turn the conversation to something lighter or slip away to his room. These were the years when Elvis's health began to show visible signs of strain. His once lean frame fluctuated in weight, his energy levels dipped, and he seemed increasingly dependent on prescription medications to keep up with the demands of performing. For Sonny, the reality was clear. The danger no longer came from the screaming crowds or opportunistic strangers outside the gates. It was something happening within Elvis's own lifestyle, a spiral that those closest to him struggled to interrupt. There was a deeper emotional toll as well. Sonny had built his life around protecting Elvis, not just as a job, but as a personal mission for someone he considered a friend. Yet every attempt to steer him toward help felt like hitting a wall. The frustration wasn't just professional, it was personal. In later years, Sonny said that you start to wonder about what more you could have done, or if you could have done it differently. The tension in the group grew heavier. Some of the men felt powerless. Others began to think drastic measures might be the only option. But for Sonny, the question was painfully simple. How do you protect someone from themselves without breaking the very loyalty that keeps you by their side? One would think that nothing can separate the Memphis Mafia, but in the thick of Elvis Presley's relentless touring schedule and personal struggles, one decision would forever alter the bond between performer and protector: the firing of Memphis Mafia. On July 13, 1976, Elvis's longtime bodyguards, Sonny West, his cousin Red West, and colleague David Hebler, were abruptly fired. The dismissal, announced by Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, was publicly blamed on a desire to cut back on expenses. But for Sonny, the truth was deeper and much more painful. It wasn't simply about money. In later interviews, he suggested the real impetus behind the firing lay in their willingness to confront Elvis about his growing dependence on prescription medications, something nobody else in the Memphis Mafia dared to do. Sonny has never been one to sugarcoat the moment. In a detailed interview, he recalled that Elvis never offered him a direct explanation. Instead, when Sonny pressed for answers, reaching out through trusted intermediaries, he was met with silence from the man he had protected for 16 years. Vernon cited financial reasons. Others whispered of lawsuits tied to overly aggressive security tactics. For Sonny, however, the dismissal felt like a betrayal, not merely professional but deeply personal. He described both the shock and heartbreak of instantly losing access to someone he saw as family. In the blink of an eye, the informal hierarchy, routines, and camaraderie dissolved. It was as if the barricade he'd built between Elvis and the outside world had been pulled down by the very body it had shielded. Almost immediately, the Wests and Hebler began writing what would become the controversial tell-all memoir, Elvis, What Happened, published mid-1977. They presented it not as a revenge piece, but as an intervention, an effort to shock Elvis into recognizing the peril he was in. In interviews, Sonny insisted the book was an act of love. Once he fired us, we couldn't do anything to stop the medication, so we said, "Let's challenge him," he explained, describing their hope that Elvis might wake up to the danger he was endangering himself. The response was swift and bitter. Elvis was reportedly furious, hurt that those he trusted most would air his vulnerabilities to the world. At one point, Elvis and Colonel Tom Parker sought to negotiate, offering payments to prevent its publication, but no agreement was reached. Sonny later reflected that the book's tone and writer undermined their intentions. Assigned journalist Steve Dunleavy added sensationalism that clouded their original plea. "That was our intention," Sonny said, "whether people believe it or not." But looking back, he admitted, "That was my only regret about the whole thing, not writing the book, but the way Dunleavy shaped it." In the end, the book's release 2 weeks before Elvis's death solidified its legacy, soared to millions in sales and forever changing how that final year of the King's life is remembered. For Sonny, the firing marked a turning point, one defined not only by heartbreak, but by the limits of loyalty. He had once believed that being silent about Elvis's troubles was protecting him. In that moment, though, he realized silence might have been the more dangerous choice of all. Sonny had spent years shielding Elvis from harm, from obsessive fans to opportunistic hangers-on. But now the men who once formed the singer's inner defense line were out, their jobs gone, their loyalty questioned. What came next would be the most controversial decision Sonny West ever made. Participating in a book that would publicly reveal the private struggles of the king of rock and roll. The controversial book, Elvis, What Happened? The project began with a phone call. Steve Dunleavy, a hard-charging journalist for the New York Post, had been approached about putting together a tell-all on Elvis Presley. His publisher wanted names, and Dunleavy knew that no one could provide more detail than the men who had spent years within arm's reach of the star. It was Red who first connected with Dunleavy, but soon Sonny and Dave were on board. All three had been let go in July 1976, a move Sonny would later describe as a business decision disguised as a friendship ending. From the outset, Sonny insisted his motivation was not revenge. In interviews years later, he explained that the intent was to shake Elvis into recognizing the danger of his lifestyle, the erratic mood swings, the dependence on prescription medication, the physical decline that even fans could now see from the stage. According to Sonny, it was supposed to be a wake-up call. They loved him and wanted him to live. But the timing and tone of Elvis, What Happened, would make that claim difficult for many to accept. The book itself was structured as a series of raw recollections. It pulled back the curtain on Gracelyn's inner life, late-night rages, spending sprees that drained millions, impulsive acts of generosity, and the ever-present pharmaceutical cocktail that seemed to follow Elvis from room to room. Sonny's chapters were peppered with anecdotes, some humorous, others deeply troubling. He spoke of Elvis firing off guns indoors for amusement, of his obsession with karate demonstrations, and of the unpredictable moods that could turn a rehearsal into a shouting match. But the most explosive content centered on the medication use, something Sonny said had grown to alarming levels by the mid-70s. Advanced publicity began before the book even hit shelves. Newspapers ran serialized excerpts focusing on the most salacious claims. Tabloid headlines shouted about the substance-ravaged King and Elvis in crisis. public reactions split decisively. Some fans accused Sonny, Red, and Dave of betrayal, arguing that any true friend would have stayed silent. Others admitted they had seen signs of trouble and believed the men's claim that they had acted out of concern. Elvis himself did not remain silent. In concert, he dismissed the book's authors as bitter ex-employees looking to cash in. He hinted that their stories were fabrications, telling audiences not to believe everything they read. But privately, according to those still close to him, the publication stung. The idea that intimate details of his life were being debated in public was a wound to a man who prized loyalty above all else. Then came the twist no one could have predicted. Elvis, What Happened was released in early August 1977. 2 weeks later, Elvis Presley was dead. The shocking timing turned the book from a scandal into an eerie, almost prophetic artifact. Reporters scrambled to interview Sonny, Red, and Dave, pressing them on whether they felt responsible for adding stress to an already fragile man. Television crews filmed them outside studios, their faces lit by camera flashes as they repeated that they had acted out of love, not malice. The backlash was intense. Fan clubs issued statements condemning the book. Hate mail poured in. Some radio stations refused to have the authors on air. Yet there was also an undeniable surge in sales. The combination of scandal and tragedy made the book an international bestseller. Copies flew off shelves in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, cementing it as one of the most infamous celebrity exposés of its era. In the years that followed, Sonny West stood by his role in the project but acknowledged its personal cost. Relationships within the Presley circle were permanently fractured. Some old friends never spoke to him again. At fan conventions, he encountered both hostility and gratitude. Hostility from those who saw him as disloyal, gratitude from those who believed his warnings were genuine. Sonny remarked, saying, "If telling the truth makes them the bad guy, then he guessed they are the bad guys." The book also became a touchstone for Elvis biographers and historians. While some questioned its accuracy, especially given Dunleavy's flair for tabloid drama, others noted that many of its claims about Elvis's health and prescription use were later corroborated by medical reports and testimony from other insiders. In that sense, Elvis, What Happened was both sensationalized and, in parts, uncomfortably accurate. For Sonny, the project was a complicated legacy. He had gone from trusted confidant to public pariah, from bodyguard to best-selling author. He maintained that he never stopped caring for Elvis, even after being pushed away. To the end of his life, he insisted that the book was an act of desperation, born from a sense that the man they loved was slipping beyond reach. Elvis's death. On the morning of August 16, 1977, Sonny West was at home when the phone rang with the news that would stun the world. Elvis Presley had passed on at just 42 years old. Sonny had lived through the ups and downs of Elvis's life for more than a decade, but nothing could have prepared him for that call. His first reaction was disbelief. He had seen Elvis survive health scares before, but as reality sank in, the sadness was compounded by something deeper, the knowledge that their final chapter together had ended in anger, and there would be no reconciliation. Just 2 weeks earlier, Sonny's tell-all memoir with Red West and Dave Hebler, Elvis: What Happened, had hit store shelves. Its timing, entirely coincidental, now felt painfully cruel. The book's release was originally meant as a warning. The three men claimed they hoped Elvis would see the truth about his lifestyle and get help. But in the shadow of his death, the narrative shifted dramatically. To many fans, the timing made it look like betrayal. Within hours of the announcement, TV crews and reporters began tracking down anyone connected to Elvis. Sonny agreed to appear alongside Dave Hebler at a press conference. Cameras rolled as reporters fired questions about the book, its motives, and whether they felt responsible for adding stress to Elvis's final days. It was there that Hebler delivered the now famous line, "How do you protect a man from himself?" Sonny nodded quietly in agreement, a simple truth in their eyes, but one that would be overshadowed by the fury of grieving fans. In the days that followed, the media became relentless. Headlines painted Sonny and his co-authors as opportunists, cashing in on Elvis's decline. Photographers camped outside his home, and news shows replayed clips from the press conference, often stripped of context. Sonny insisted in interviews that the book wasn't written out of spite, but out of genuine concern. Still, his words struggled to cut through the tidal wave of public emotion. Privately, Sonny grieved in his own way. He thought back to the early years, long nights on tour, shared jokes, and the bond that made them feel more like family than employee and employer. That history made the loss personal, not just historic. But he also knew that their final year had been clouded by tension. His dismissal in 1976 had been framed as a business decision, yet Sonny always believed it was Colonel Parker's way of silencing criticism. The funeral at Graceland was both heartbreaking and surreal. Sonny joined the throngs of mourners, but he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Some former colleagues embraced him, others kept their distance. Cameras were everywhere, capturing every tear, every handshake. Standing near the coffin, Sonny had no words, just a flood of memories of the man he had guarded on stage, shielded from threats, and in his mind, tried to save himself. In the months after the controversy over Elvis, what happened didn't fade. Sales skyrocketed, driven by morbid curiosity, and the book became a permanent part of Elvis's story and Sonny's. To some, it was an important historical document, a candid look at the king's final years. To others, it would always be a betrayal published at the worst possible moment. For Sonny, the aftermath was a mix of mourning, reflection, and unwanted notoriety. He had lost a friend, been cast as a villain, and found himself holding a role in one of the most controversial chapters in rock and roll history. And yet, he never fully recanted the book's message. As he would say in later years, if Elvis listened, maybe we'd be telling a different story. Sonny's life after Elvis. In the years following Elvis Presley's death, Sonny West lived with a complicated legacy. To millions of Elvis fans, his name would forever be linked to Elvis, What Happened?, the controversial book released just weeks before the King's passing. For decades, Sonny found himself walking a fine line between defending his intentions and living with the reality that many would never forgive him. Yet as time passed, he became more reflective, more willing to share both the good and the bad of his years in the Presley inner circle. In interviews from the 80s onward, Sonny often spoke about the two Elvises he had known, the vibrant, generous young man who could light up a room, and the later figure struggling with health problems, erratic behavior, and an increasing dependency on prescription medications. Sonny never wavered in his admiration for Elvis's talent and charisma. Even when recounting difficult moments, he would follow them with a reminder of Elvis's kindness and loyalty during the early years. For Sonny, those memories were too important to be erased by the tensions of the final chapter. Still, the shadow of the book lingered. Whenever Sonny gave an interview, the subject came up sometimes subtly, other times directly. Over time, he developed a measured response. He explained that Elvis, What Happened?, had been intended as a wake-up call, written out of concern rather than greed. He claimed the plan was for the book to prompt Elvis to confront his medication use and health issues, perhaps even to initiate a reunion. In Sonny's words, if Elvis had picked up the phone, we'd have been back there the next day. But history had other plans. As the decades passed, some fans began to soften. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Elvis nostalgia was at a high, and documentaries, tribute shows, and fan conventions were drawing large crowds. Sonny found a place in that world, attending events and speaking on panels alongside other former members of Elvis's entourage. While a portion of the fan base still viewed him with suspicion, others appreciated his candor and insider perspective. His stories, told with humor and detail, painted a human picture of Elvis that balanced myth with reality. Sonny also began to write and record his own memoirs, giving himself the chance to tell his story without the filter of co-authors or publishers with their own agendas. His book, Still Taking Care of Business, released in 2007, was his attempt to set the record straight. In it, he revisited his years with Elvis, from their first meeting to his firing, and addressed the fallout from the earlier tell-all. Unlike the tabloid-leaning tone of Elvis, What Happened?, Sonny's later work was more reflective, weaving in personal regrets, moments of pride, and a recognition of the complex man behind the icon. Outside of the Elvis orbit, Sonny pursued various ventures. He appeared in small film and TV roles, leveraging his connection to Hollywood through Elvis's movie career. He also worked in security for other entertainers, though no job ever matched the intensity or scale of protecting the most famous man in the world. Financial difficulties and health issues occasionally made headlines, but Sonny remained a familiar face at Elvis-related events right up until his later years. By the 2010, his appearances at fan gatherings often included Q&A sessions where he fielded the same questions he'd been asked for decades. How did Elvis really live behind closed doors? Did Sonny regret the book? Could anything have saved Elvis in the final years? His answers had grown more philosophical. He would acknowledge that timing and perception had hurt his reputation, but he insisted that his conscience was clear. Sonny's later reflections also revealed a man deeply affected by loyalty both given and lost. He often spoke warmly of the camaraderie among the Memphis Mafia in the early days, when the group was young, hungry, and willing to do anything for Elvis. Over time, as fame and pressure mounted, those bonds frayed under the weight of conflicting interests, business meddling, and the isolating influence of Colonel Tom Parker. Sonny's firing in 1976 was a wound that never fully healed, though he rarely expressed outright bitterness toward Elvis. Instead, he laid most of the blame at Parker's door, believing the colonel had steered Elvis away from people who might challenge him. In 2017, Sonny West passed away after a long battle with cancer. News of his death prompted an outpouring of tributes from fellow Elvis associates and fans alike. Social media filled with photos, clips, and personal stories from people who had met him at conventions or book signings. Even those who had once criticized him acknowledged his role in preserving Elvis history. He had been a protector, a companion, and, in his own way, a whistleblower. Roles that did not always sit comfortably together, but were all part of the truth. Today, Sonny's legacy within Elvis lore remains complex. To some, he is still the man who helped publish a book that tarnished the king's image. To others, he is a vital witness to history, someone who spoke truths others were too afraid to say. His accounts, whether in Elvis' What Happened, Still Taking Care of Business, or countless interviews, have become essential sources for biographers and documentarians trying to piece together the reality of Elvis Presley's final years. What stands out most in hindsight is that Sonny never fully stepped away from the Elvis world. Even when the conversations were uncomfortable, even when the questions were repetitive, he showed up. He told the stories. He laughed at the good memories and didn't shy away from the darker ones. In doing so, he contributed to a more rounded, more human portrayal of Elvis, a portrayal that recognizes both the magic and the flaws. For fans watching old footage of Sonny in interviews, the loyalty is still visible. It's there in the way he talks about Elvis's generosity, how he lights up describing a practical joke on tour, and how his voice softens when recalling the early years in Memphis. That loyalty is also evident in his insistence that the warnings in the book were meant to save, not destroy. Whether one believes that or not, it is clear Sonny carried that conviction for the rest of his life. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and click on the next video shown on your screen.